Welcome everyone. So in this unit we're going to look at variables. So we'll see what variables are, and also we'll have examples to understand more what variables are. Alright, so we'll start with the definition. What are variables? Variables are spaces in memory where we can store values. So these spaces in memory we can store different values. So we can also define variables to be storage locations. It's hard to understand just by definition. So let's illustrate through a diagram representation. Wow. So here, let's assume this is a block of memory. So in a block of memory, we have a part where we have values, and then the other part where we have addresses. So the part for addresses shouldn't be our concern so much at the moment, but let us focus on this upper space where we have the values. Of course, when we talk about the variable, it's just this space here, this cell specifically, where we'll give it a specific name, and then the value will be stored here. So whenever we call that name, we use that name in the program, within the program, we are able to access the values in that cell. So in our case, where, for example, here where I have variable, let me just change the value for variable. I put value. So in this case, I have a variable called variable, then with a value called value. So I can add here the name of a variable, which is called variable. So this space name is variable, and then the value is value. So we can also let us also declare another variable. So another variable which is called, maybe now let us have a new one called var or agree, which I'll store a value yes. So here I'll write the variable name agree. So basically that's the idea about variables. Variables are spaces in memory, in other ways named storage locations. So we named it variable, this one we named it agree, then the values are being stored there. Alright, so now let's see how we can have a variable in a program. To create a new variable, we'll refer to it, we describe it as declaration. So you declare a variable. Of course, when declaring, you have to have a valid name. So in our case here we have variable, but then it will store a variable which is named variable. Another variable here, it's agree, which stores the value yes. And then another variable here we have an example is fruit, which is the value is apple, which has the value apple. Then we have another one vegetable, which stores the value tomato. And then we have the variable with a value Joseph. So these variables are very essential in programming, and we need to be very careful because each programming language has its syntax to the way you can have your variable name to be valid. So for example, here one of the best practice to creating a variable is having a variable name which is descriptive. In this case, look at my variable, except for the first one which I was given as an example. But when I say agreed, yes, it's a value of agreement. Fruit, I stored a value apple. I can store another value, maybe guava, which is a fruit. There's a link, there's a relation between the two. So the fruit I can store, but do not be confined, because it's possible and it's allowed. You can change the name of this variable with anything. so it will be stored. The computer doesn't have a problem with that. But the only problem which it might have is you having a wrong variable name. We'll take a look at which ones are wrong variable names. All right. So the other thing is variables. The variables names, you're supposed to stick to small letters. It's not restricted to that, but it's one of the best practice. So this variable here, which is in capital, which is starting in capital, which is capitalized, it's valid. But of course, be consistent in your programming, because the problem is that if I forget the name of fruit, I use at some part of the program, I use fruit this way. This will cause an error. So it will cause an error because this and this, they are not the same. No wonder we like using letters. Avoid using symbols. So symbols like comma, plus, equals, full stop, minus, question mark, the hash, starting with numbers, variables starting with numbers. So starting a variable name with these symbols and numbers is not allowed in Python. So avoid that. Start a variable with a letter. Again, so for example, here we have name. We can change this name. We can add 2, 3. It's allowed. It's totally allowed. Similarly, we can put a hyphen. It's allowed. But it's better to use variable names which you can easily remember when coding, because when you write several lines of code, you might forget. But if it's easy to remember and descriptive, of course you'll be more consistent in writing it, and then also it will help you to avoid creating errors. So remember what I mentioned to say this fruit and fruit are different. So this comes to this point where we say case sensitive. Python is case sensitive programming language. User and username and username. These are two different variables. This one is starting with a U, and then this is starting with it is capitalized. These two are different names. And then we can also use underscore in two names. It's allowed. And then also we can use camel case. Camel case it's a case where we have the first part of a word, it's in small letter. Then the second part of the word, it starts with a capital letter. Oh, that is it with variables. See you in the next lesson.